Communicare Breathing Space has been operating for the last 12 years. So 12 years ago we identified the need to provide perpetrators of family and domestic violence with support and response to help them understand and accept responsibility for their behaviour. The idea was to remove the perpetrators and to provide them with intensive support and intervention for a 3-month period. So it's the only residential therapeutic community for perpetrators of family and domestic violence in the Southern Hemisphere.
By removing the man from the home and then coming on site for 3 months, it allows the woman to actually get her own breathing space time. So breathing space for her will look like what decisions she needs to make, how to empower her to start making some of those decisions for both herself and for her children. That may include a life without the perpetrator and moving on. For some women that still includes having a life with the perpetrator, but there's some real specific boundaries that need to be put in place and they need to make sure that they're going to be safe.
We'd like to change the dialogue around women fleeing and leaving their homes. We thought it was important that the women continue to be able to be provided with the level of support in their home environment and children continue to go to their schools.
For some women, it doesn't mean that they actually want to leave the relationship, they just want the violence to stop.
Before the guys come into the program, they agree to give us their partner or ex-partner's details. Those details are then passed on to Communicare's Partnerships for Family Safety. We contact the partners and provide them with support and safety planning. And while the residents are here, we also provide them with safety planning. I think it's important to highlight that we don't have a typical client because domestic violence affects every socio-economic, every education, every nook and cranny of society. 99% of the clients that I have worked with have grown up in a household with domestic violence. When your parents role model that behaviour, it becomes normal and it becomes what you accept as normal. It's an absolute gender issue, it's a power and control issue, and ultimately these guys have a choice, and that's what we teach them here. We teach them strategies and we teach them that no matter how angry you are or how much you're seeing red, you still have even a split second to choose your behaviour.
Pretty much on a daily basis there's domestic violence in regard to verbal abuse, shouting, screaming, raging, destroying property, grabbing my partner from time to time, going off at her children, verbally abusing them. Not so much destroying their stuff, because most of the stuff I would destroy was my own, but I had no idea of domestic violence then, didn't realise that was domestic violence. I've learnt since that, yeah, it's totally unacceptable.
At Breathing Space, we accept guys who can be mandated through the courts. They may be mandated through corrective services or actually through the parole system as well. And then we also have the non-mandated men who may ring up, or a family member may ring up and inquire about the program. Ultimately, there's some form of mandation. Usually if it's not legal mandation, there's a social mandation, because the risk is high for them. They're going to lose something, either their family or contact with their children if they don't change their behaviours.
I presented down to Rockingham Hospital at the end of my tether. Literally was at the end of my rope. I didn't know which way I was going to go. They initially were going to turn me away, and at the last second suggested I try a place in Kwinana called Breathing Space, and had an interview and was put into what was called a transition-in unit, where they sort of monitored me for the first couple of weeks before being accepted into the full 3-month program.
Around 18 months ago, we identified, when we were doing our initial assessments, that there were a lot of guys kind of right on the very edge of being accepted, but their alcohol and drug use was too high. The wait list for rehabs are for 5 months at the moment. Also, we identified that sometimes they had just been put on medication and they weren't quite stable. So we introduced a transition-in program which is a 5-bed program. And that's just more for staff monitoring, see how the guys are going, can they stay abstinent, can they be compliant with their medication. So that's up to about 4 weeks they can stay in there, and then they come up to breathing space. When they come in, they're very anxious, very nervous, very unsettled, and can kind of think of 100 reasons why they can't be here. And what we find is that the residents who have been here longer tend to settle some of that down a little bit, tend to mentor the newer residents.
The house really is like your family for 12 weeks, and they make it feel like a family.
When the clients arrive at Breathing Space, they undergo a induction process. They're allocated a bed in a shared bedroom, so there's 2 beds per room. The rooms also contain a small fridge and a wardrobe and a chest of drawers. The other areas are shared areas, so the kitchen, dining room, TV, lounge room. While the guys are here, they are expected to cook for themselves, and they're expected to clean. They're allocated a chore to complete every week.
When the men first come on site, we always do a suitability assessment with them to see if they're appropriate for the program. And then that would include within that first week a formal assessment, what their history, behaviours, abusive patterns they've used, and that gives us a really good understanding around what sort of risk they may pose to their family. And also it gives us good insight around what facilitators, what staff members need to know around connection with this person if we're going to be working alongside them. If we have concerns, then we'll be looking at what those concerns are, and then also, do we need to notify anyone else? We may actually make contact with the partner or the ex-partner, and if we have concerns, for example, if he's gone off site, okay, we need to potentially flag the partner's house with the police. It also means that if that person if our client has come on as part of the program under a court mandation, and there's been specific curfews around him attending, if he goes off site, that actually may be a breach of his curfew. If he doesn't return back to breathing space, that may be a breach of curfew. So we're always ongoing looking at, is this person abiding to what their conditions of stay is? And the conditions of stay with breathing space would be what we ask of them, plus additional any other court requirements for them to stay in the program.
Every day we've got 2 2-hour groups. It's a mix of groups. So we do a parenting group, and that looks at the effects of domestic violence on children.
The groups initially I found not easy, but was pretty smooth sailing until perhaps midway through the program, when stuff started hitting home and I'd have to time out from the odd group.
We've got our Men Relating Safely group, and that looks at the cycle of violence. In that, we also ask that the guys do an offence map, what they were thinking, what they were feeling at the time of the most recent or most violent incident. And we also ask them to do it from their partner's perspective, so what their partner may have been thinking, may have been feeling at that time.
Probably the most confronting part of the program was the mapping the incident, where we had to pick one of our worst domestic violence occasions and map it. This for me was particularly confronting, as my partner ended up having an aneurysm, not so much from domestic violence, but it sure didn't help the cause.
We do a alcohol and other drug group, which looks at the co-morbid domestic violence, alcohol and drug. We do understanding emotions, which is exactly that. We find when the guys first arrive, they can only identify really a few emotions. Going through that group, we look at, thoughts, beliefs, feelings, that kind of thing. And we also do understanding anger and aggression.
Coming into the program, my rage and anger levels were such that I actually thought I had a anger disease. I wasn't convinced I could manage it. I just thought it was part of me, inbuilt somehow. Through the program, learning ways to recognise the stages of anger, I realised that's not the case at all. I've pretty much brought it under control. I can feel myself getting angry where before it was just an instantaneous switch.
We also identified a long time ago the need for extra support when they leave. So we, in June this year, opened our transition units. That gives the guys who complete the Breathing Space program a further 9 months of supported accommodation. So while they're in the units, they're expected to attend a case management session once a fortnight and also a group if required. And the guys who are in the transition units are hopefully working, studying, volunteering or actively looking for work.
Coming into the program, my self-esteem was zero. I'm starting to get some of that back of undertaking study and got myself back into the workforce again. Really my life's taken a whole 360.
We are currently sitting at around a 45% completion rate. So 45% may not sound great, but I think when you compare it to other programs, I think they sit at around 20-25%. I think the benefit there is being in a residential environment. We work so intensively with the clients as well as case management, and they also receive counselling. So it gives you opportunities to interact with the residents, not just in a formal group setting.
The staff here are incredible, direct. They're here for you 24/7, no problems too big. Their knowledge of the course, what the boys have come from and are going through, is second to none. Speaking from first-hand experience, to be turned away from a hospital for, I guess, mental health issues, a place like Breathing Space is incredible. I can't speak of it highly enough.
Family domestic violence is very high on the agenda for all federal and state governments. We're really keen to be able to let the departments and the governments know that this type of model where perpetrators are held responsible for their behaviour and provided with intervention and response to allow them to behave differently in their relationships is vital in terms of rolling out any sort of strategy for family and domestic violence.